I find what you talk about very fascinating. And I think it would be very selfish of me not to share this with the wider audience, because I'm sure there's other people on this journey. They're like, there's something here. It's very valuable, but I can't quite grasp my head around it. So I wanted to ask,
Right.
I wanted to have this conversation with you and ask some questions, I guess in a bit more layman's terms, because quite
Sure,
often when we
sure.
speak about these topics, we assume that people know what we're talking about. And I think not
Yeah,
everyone is on the
yeah,
same, not everyone's on the same kind of a page.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people talk about it as if they know about it, but they don't really know
Mm.
about it either.
Yeah, I'm guilty of
Uh,
that. I'm guilty of that myself.
no, I don't think so. I think you have, at least you understand that there are things that you may not know. You're
Mm,
reflecting on
mm,
yourself, but I think there are people out there that just want to act like they know, but they
mm,
don't know. And I think a lot of them, even things are just changing so quickly right
mhm,
now that even I find myself sometimes looking at what I'm reading and not really grasping it. And
mhm,
sometimes there's just not enough time in the day to absorb all of this new
mm,
information that
mm,
constantly keeps trickling in. You're talking about
mm,
ontologies and knowledge graphs and context engineering. And then now everybody's talking about context graphs. Like,
mm.
what the heck?
Yeah,
What are we
yeah.
talking about? And
And
why are we talking
yeah,
about this?
I find it very helpful when you tag other people in your posts, because then I get to click on their profiles and see what they're talking about. So
Yeah,
I can build a better picture. So that's very useful.
right.
Yeah.
That makes
So
sense.
we haven't agreed on the agenda or the questions, right? So
Yeah.
we're totally freestyling this, but
Yeah.
uh, I would like to set the scene of how I'm thinking about the topic, and then I want
Sure.
to let you talk about the vision of this kind of orchestration layer and the
Sure.
context graph. But I feel like many people are in a similar position to myself, where I've never hands-on implemented a composable e-commerce stack. I know about it, I understand it, I know how
Hmm.
we fit into
Hmm.
it. I've never done it myself, right? So I think when I look at this orchestration layer, I think, well, like why do we need one? Like it like surely it all makes sense. Like you have a use case, you connect your PIM to your content platform, you have an
Yeah.
experience. Like how much more difficult can it get? But where the penny dropped for me, and I think that's where the penny dropped for many other people like myself, because of NA10 and LangChain, everyone's trying to do some agentic workflows, and you realize that when you do a first test, yeah, you get the results and it looks pretty believable. But then when you try to make it more complicated, you realize that, oh, wait a second, there's some serious gaps here. And where I really understood it, and I couldn't quite understand why, I was back in November, I was analyzing the AI styling assistants by Zalando, Mango, and Daydream. So they had these chatbots they launched, and many of the companies have done it since as well, where you can
Right.
interact with a chatbot and they tell you, give a styling advice. But it's you ask the initial prompt and it looks good. You're like, oh wow, this is pretty cool. But then you start to ask for a very specific use case, very specific occasion, and then it
Yeah.
starts to fall apart. Like in Zalando
Yeah.
case, it was recommending maternity clothing when I was asking for a beach wedding outfit as a guest. Yeah, Mango did a really good job when it comes to kind of inspiration, but then even then I asked it to find a product that I was looking at on a PDP, and I could find the product
Right.
via search, but it couldn't find the product via the chatbot. It wasn't available. And then Daydream, which again is an amazing app, and but because they have so many brands on there, there's this lack of consistency in how they label
Yes.
colors and size. And then suddenly you ask it for a green beach wedding with puffy
Yeah.
sleeves. It gives you brown and gray. And
Yeah.
the immediate effect is great, but then something's missing. I
Exactly.
guess just to throw this question at you, is this just a growing pain? Will they eventually get there? Or is there something fundamentally missing in that experience?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there to build an agent successfully, a shopping agent, styling agent, whatever type of agent that is rooted in your organizational knowledge or semantics is key, right? But in order for you to do that, you have to have those semantics. So for example, you talk about color, right? In you may have something like orange or gold, for
Mhm.
example, that are close in terms of meaning, but they are tagged differently in different catalogs, potentially from the same brand in two different channels, or it's one conglomerate brand with multiple brands under it that are tagging their data completely differently. And so AI needs to, when it's searching through your product catalog, it needs some sort of consistency in your data in order for it to provide that consistent answer. By default, if you go back a little bit to understand how LLMs work, LLMs are trained on a certain data set, which is not including your data set typically, because it may be proprietary, maybe behind, it's not crawled, it's not, even if it was crawled, it may not be used to actually train the LLM itself. And then there is the inference part of the LLM. So in real time, when you ask it a question, it's going to do its best guess to answer your question based on what it knows. But if your brand has very specific, or every brand is very specific to their own brand, like their style, the way they speak about it, the brand voice, it's all very specific. It's of course not going to know about that by default. So it's going to just, based on the prompt, figure out maybe I should speak this way or that way. The prompt has to be very detailed in order for it to get close. So you're stuffing all of this information into the prompt, telling it, hey, my brand sounds like this. Take a look at this article or this website or this data, this information, and try to sound like that, right? So you're now prompting it with this additional information to help it understand your brand's voice and how you want to speak to the customer. But the thing you can't do is take your entire data set, like everything about the brand, so thousands of documents potentially, and stuff them into the prompt, right? For two reasons. One, the larger the context window gets with these LLMs, the more the LLM will hallucinate. Because after some point, it has to answer your question. It's not going to go through every single piece of what you've shared with it to formulate its answer, right? So what then the AI engineers and the entire industry has started to do in the last few years is start looking at RAG systems. So RAG is essentially the way you build a RAG system is that you create this data set somewhere else, so not inside the LLM, somewhere else, that LLMs have access to on the fly as they're trying to answer a question and formulate the response. You say, hey, part of the response is not going to come from your trained information. It's going to actually come from our business knowledge that we have gathered and made available for real-time retrieval over here, right? And so that could include your brand guidelines, the information, general information about the brand, the voice that you want to answer the question, the customer with, all of that information. Your product catalog is a big part of it. That is sitting elsewhere now. Now that data that you put somewhere needs to be accessible in real time, but it also needs to be searchable in a way that is easy for the LLM to get to. So first it has to be fast and quick and all of that, but it can't just be a keyword search, because if it's keyword search, what will happen is it's going to look for the exact values. Let's say you extract the query, I want an orange, I don't know, sweater for Halloween, but your product catalog doesn't say orange at all. So if you do a keyword search, it's going to try to find everything that is orange and that is a sweater, but it's not going to find something that made gold with spooky designs on it that is not a sweater, but more of it says shirt instead of sweater. Do you see what I mean? So there is a gap there in the way the LLM needs to go and find that information.
And it's like and I guess when I was thinking about it, there's multiple levels, particularly if you focus on a fashion retailer. There is the way a merchant would describe something, right? This is the language they use to buy and order things, and that's how it's normally stored in their ERP and then in a PIM. Then there's the language that a customer may use, right? But then there's
Right.
also some subcultures that would call this thing something entirely different, or maybe there's a sub-trend that emerged and they will call it something different, right? So you
Something
have this,
completely different.
right? And then, so as well as storing this data and making it available to LLM, then there's this human element of actually managing this taxonomy, and the framework becomes important, right? Because you have to allow then the stylist or whoever's responsible for the brand DNA making those adjustments, right? And I guess that the question is, where does that live?
Where does that live? Exactly. And so PIM is typically the place where it would live, like that's where the information would get augmented to the product catalog. So you would have your merchandising teams and potentially even your UX and marketing teams go in and adjust the data and enrich the data either manually or have a service potentially like Map Fashion that is used to do it in a more AI powered way and pull that data in and augment the data in the PIM to have that additional context about the way you want to describe your products, etc. But ultimately, from a retrieval standpoint, from the LLM standpoint, LLM shouldn't be calling the PIM. What it should be calling is a real time, unless the PIM has a semantic index that is built into it, it is real time retrievable. And for example, DXGraph acts as a PIM, and we do that. But not every PIM in the world there is real time. You typically have to index the data through search. And that's where I was getting to the search aspect of, which is also important. Search can't be keyword search in this case, because you have a conversational front that you're, and customers having a conversation with the LLM, and that conversation is not going to be very precise.
This
Not
is
going to
where,
be using the language.
and this is so specific, but and this is where I'm wondering, where does the semantic layer sit? Because in fashion, like the brand might choose to call, like anywhere in our marketing, we don't say watches, we say timepieces. Or modesty in New York is a different to modesty in Dubai. So that semantic, would I really then keep on adding additional metadata and columns for, okay, modesty, Dubai, New York? That makes no sense. It just becomes impossible to manage.
It becomes too much. Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's two aspects to that as well. One is when you are indexing your data, right? And you use a vector index to index it, you don't necessarily have to have the exact terms in your product catalog for the search to find it. If somebody looks, modesty is probably not a good example in this particular case, because it's actually very specific, and your LLM would have to understand that the modesty in Dubai means something different than modesty in New York. But colors, those types of things, a little bit less sophisticated, I would say, is something that LLMs are really good at finding and indexing your data with. So even if you search for green, you may find something like grass color, for example, or earth mint, colors, or whatnot, or mint, or leaves, or whatever. It will find that type of data with a search that doesn't match exactly to the keywords. So I think it's a bit of both. I think one is enhancing the data with certain level of metadata that is not obvious at all, that is so brand specific that even a vector index cannot find that information, because it's not in your typical human language. It's not a very obvious thing. But I think the other side is you do need to enhance the language of the way you describe the products for anything that is very brand specific, or maybe even culture specific. Like a scarf is not the same as a hijab.
Yeah.
In Arabic, for example, in Arab cultures, women wear hijab, but that's not the same as women wearing scarves in New York. So that has to be called out more specifically within your index for it to understand the difference between them.
Yeah. And that's the point that I was trying to get to, because with these it's very easy to build a chatbot by connecting it to a PIM. You say, I'm
Yeah,
looking for a green wedding dress, and LLM will figure out you're looking for a V-neck, you're looking for something that's not too transparent because you don't want to see the underwear at the wedding, right? He'll figure that out. But and that's on a in a prototype test scenario that works well and it'll give you a good result. In reality, brand is so critical, right? And brand controls what kind of trends we follow, the language we speak. One brand might say that's appropriate for an evening. Like LLM will say, yeah, that's appropriate for an evening. A scarf, a leather jacket, appropriate. That brand would never dress their customers in a leather jacket for an evening because that's against the brand
exactly.
DNA. So that's why it's important to have that. Otherwise, if you just throw the raw data or whatever product catalog you have using image vector search and connecting it to LLM, it's just not gonna deliver that
It
brand.
won't. Absolutely. And I think that knowledge of the brand needs to
Mm,
be available for real-time retrieval as well.
mm,
It's not just the product catalog
mm,
itself, but the relationship to trends, the information about what is hip and cool right now and what is not,
mm,
that has to sit, that information needs to live somewhere so that when someone says, hey, show me something that is trendy right now in New York. What does that mean? What does your product catalog know what that means? Or does the LLM know what it
mm.
means? But LLM is probably trained on data that is 2 years old.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you don't want it
Mm,
going and searching the web
mm,
in real
mm,
time
mm,
to find that information
mm,
out
mm,
right now and guessing at it
mm,
as
mm,
well. So the brand needs to make that information
mm,
available in some sort of a knowledge graph or a real-time retrieval repository, potentially connected to your product catalog
mm,
as well, but not necessarily, right? So it could be something that sits on the
mm,
side. It gets called to see what's trendy right now, or what does a brand want me to see right now? And then based on that, once a brand gives you that answer, then you go call the product catalog
yeah, exactly.
to
And
find the right
actually, yeah.
information.
And your argument about the timeliness of trends and being available on LLMs is valid, but I would say in real production environment, that's not even as important as actually having the control because one brand might say, I would never we'd never style shorts with flip-flops. We don't do that. LLM
Yeah,
will have
yeah.
no
So
problem.
there's
Yeah,
rules.
because
Yes.
LLM will come up with a trend. They're like, oh yeah, there's this New York style, streetwear style. Our brand doesn't follow
Right.
that style. Like, never tell my customer to dress like that because that's
Yes,
against.
yeah.
Because
So some
and this.
rules have to be enforceable. You need some governance and some control over what the brand will allow the customer
Mhm,
to actually see. And so there are two ways to do that. One is you go and get what you would get without those rules first, and then you filter
mhm,
based on the rules that have been enforced. And this is where the orchestration layer typically
mhm,
comes in. It's trying to find or trying to balance AI powered reasoning with
mhm,
deterministic rules and deterministic control. You can, within the orchestration layer, is a native rules engine that the brands can go and say, if this, do this, if this, do that, or don't do this or don't do that in these contexts, right? Some
mhm,
context, and there's some target experience.
mhm,
So you basically are laying out all of your rules. And this is
mhm,
where the argument about context graphs
mhm,
comes in, right? With people have been talking about what's a context graph. It's not just
mhm,
a relationship between two different entities, it's what decisions are being made
mhm,
in what context. What do you do in certain contexts? And that's where I made the argument that it's a rules engine
mhm,
typically enforces those rules. Now, how do you build those rules? If they are not explicitly stated anywhere, that's a different problem. Like if the customer goes to the store and asks a question about what I should wear to the wedding, and the associate says you should wear this,
mhm,
that knowledge is a different that's something that has to be captured somewhere in
mhm,
order for the context graph to actually
mhm.
do what it
And
needs
that's the
to
bit
do.
that really worries me
Yeah.
right now. I know some of my LinkedIn posts are quite existential. This is dying and this is dying, but This is
Yeah.
so important because the geek inside of me thinks, wow, this is amazing. And I'm sure many CTOs right now are thinking, we can do a chatbot, we can do these things. But
Yeah.
in fashion, if your brand doesn't exist, like if people don't understand what your brand really stands for and what doesn't exist, you don't have a business. There's no, otherwise
Yeah.
people might
Yeah.
as well shop with whoever is the cheapest that makes
Oh,
beautifully
totally. I mean,
manufactured clothes.
why do we have Louis Vuitton and
Yeah.
Dior? The multi-billion dollar businesses, there's a reason for that. It's because people believe in those brands and what they stand for and the style that they have that nobody else has. There's that prestige that comes with it. Otherwise, you can buy a bag for $30 as well out there. You don't have to pay $5,000 for it. But I completely agree with you. So brand has to have some life in it. It needs to mean something. And it has to be very, very specific and very carefully curated, that experience. And I think that's why you can't just let the LLMs just figure it out completely, because then they literally have a mind of their own, and not it's the mind is not the brand's mind by any
It's
means,
not even a,
unless you teach it
it's not even
to
of
be
it's not
that
even
way.
of their own. It's because they use Reddit and all the
That's what I mean.
whatever
Yeah.
magazines
Yeah.
have said or reviews. So suddenly, like in the past, as a brand, and particularly luxury brands, you have creative directors own the entire estate. Like nothing goes out to customers until it's approved and it looks like that. It needs to
Yeah.
look like this.
Yes.
Now we're moving
Yes.
to a place where you have no control of how your brand is presented, because your brand is presented and your brand voice changes on an hourly, daily basis based on what's out there. And I don't think like most AI conversations that we're having are all about efficiency, right? So how does AI help us drive efficiency and decrease costs to be more efficient?
Yes.
And that leads to conversations about, let's do a chatbot because that will help us decrease some costs. But that domain expertise of who's responsible for curating these rules, encoding the brand language and the brand DNA and the taxonomy, the styles, aesthetics, occasions that we adhere to in a language that both customers and LMs understand, that doesn't really exist, right? Most brand guidelines, they sit in a 200-page PDF document that someone has to
Yeah.
read. And this is the bit that really worries me. What's happening with UCP and people are moving to chatbots, but that layer is really missing.
That layer is missing. That layer is missing. And in fact, yesterday I was looking at Google Shopping experience. Now, Google Shopping by default is an AI native experience. So you can actually go and search for Louis Vuitton purses. And so you're specifically like talking about a brand to Google, and Google does its best to give you the answers about that brand based on the knowledge that it finds on the internet. And not just on the Louis Vuitton brand website. It will go find it from all of the retailers, luxury retailers that are holding on to their stock, the way they describe the brand, right? But the sad thing is, and I don't know and how sad it is yet, because it will all play out. Does not have control over that right now. It doesn't. They will have to just go with what Google shows until they go build their merchant account, Google Merchant Center, go in and tell Google, if somebody is asking a question about my brand, this is how I want you to respond. So Google's now allowing for some intervention from the brands to actually take some control over the way their brands presented. And then there's further control that is being passed on to the brands with UCP as well, because Merchant Center and UCP and Google Shopping, they're all working in tandem to present a brand experience that the brand really cares to present on Google. So the work there is for the brands to follow the protocols that Google is giving you. You don't really have much of a choice in following those protocols. You have to listen to Google and present that information in a way that Google wants you to present it. So things like rules, recommendations, or loyalty-based experiences, or promotions, all of that stuff you need to present as capabilities that are exposed to Google. So when the Google business agent answers the questions of the customer, that it's going to your back end and retrieving just the right information to present it back. But until then, very few retailers have actually done any of that. So right now we're at the mercy of what Google's 50 billion products knowledge graph that they've built behind the scenes, where the information comes from the entire internet. You're stuck with that right now. So it's going to take time for brands to catch up, and I think the brands that catch up faster are going to win, because what you're doing essentially by exposing those capabilities and that knowledge about your brand is that you're fixing the mistakes of Google, that Google's making talking about your brand, and it fixes that, or gives the customers at least the better or the right view of the brand in the meantime, because Google's going to still be the top search term. And it also raises the question of how many customers are actually going to go to the website to search for information about a brand. If Google search or Google shopping is giving you all of the right information that you need, or at least doesn't even have to be right. The fact that it acts like it's right, it's so confident, you as a customer probably don't know any better. If you're like, oh, okay, Dior is probably going in and helping Google understand their brand. And so I'll just ask Google what I need to ask, which may not be true, but it's looking like it is true right now.
And it's very different to what we experienced before, because you could argue when Google started, you type something into Google and you know that the website or the blog you're reading is not the actual Dior or Valentino website. So the risk is quite low. It's just someone's opinion. But because of how credible and how confident the LLMs are in giving the response, it feels like this is the truth. And this is the biggest problem with losing the brand DNA in this, is that you have no control. Someone so confident and someone that you rely on daily basis with your medical queries and your CV and whatever it might be, right? And they give you this advice about Valentino and Dior and Prada, but it's totally confidently hallucinating what the answer is. Like, how scary is that?
That is very scary. That is very scary, I would say. I don't have a very good answer to what's going to happen to the brands and their image based on this. But one thing I do know is that momentum is there. The agentic commerce momentum is there, and it's only gonna accelerate. And brands have to catch up. They have to do something, because the other option is to just let Google decide what to say about you. And do you want that? Do you want somebody else to own the conversation with the customer? Maybe not the relationship, because Google is at least better from that perspective than OpenAI is, and is letting the brands have some control over what is presented to the customer, but they still have to go do it. And not many customers are doing it yet.
And now I'd be curious if anyone watching this, or if you hear anyone, I'd be curious to see who's doing it right now. And it's probably the first time in this whole AI conversation in general where I can clearly see a new role being created, where someone needs to do this. Right now, there is no one in fashion retailers that owns this or would know how to do this, because yes, you have the creative directors who own the brand, and there's people that manage the brand guidelines, but none of these creative director rules or brand guidelines are written in a way that's ingestible,
that is
as
consumable.
An
Exactly.
Right?
And that so one, it needs to be ingestible, and it needs to be structured in a way that when queried, it comes back with the right structure and the right response, so Google can use it to answer the question in the right way. Sure, you can have PDF files, but Google's not really interested in reading through your PDF files. It needs to be exposed as an API, essentially, with here are my brand guidelines. So there's this idea of capabilities within UCP that it's allowing merchants to implement. So there are some basic capabilities like checkout and add to cart and returns and whatnot, but then they're trying to go a step further to build custom capabilities as well. And I have to actually take a look. I think that something came out this week as well about adding more capabilities already, such as like loyalty and promotions and whatnot. But I think the brand guidelines and how to read the brand guidelines should definitely be one of the capabilities that is made available to the business agents. And when I say business agent, it's the Google business agent. When you go to googleshopping.com and start typing in your question, the business agent that is defaulted for your experience. But if you ask for a specific brand, then it actually gives the brand or the merchant more control over how you want to present that agent to the customer. But yeah, and the concerns are real. I have no questions about that. There is definitely a lot to think about from a brand standpoint, and I worry that things are just moving so quickly that brands are not ready for this change, and the ones that are or are really thinking about it right now are the ones that are going to actually benefit from this, and the ones that don't, they'll just be represented in a way that they are not really happy about, or their competitors are going to show up in that shopping experience, or other fake like copies of the brands, and all sorts of stuff can show up in those results that they're hoping that they're not going to be able to control.
Yeah, and there's a risk that I call them the ghost brands, right? So eventually, if these agents are orchestrating and they're finding customers for you, effectively you just become a warehouse that's selling commodity, and then suddenly the entire margin in fashion retail is in the brand and obviously in the quality of the product. But if the brand is not there, if they don't care where to buy it, and your brand is not reflecting the right way, that's it. You're really going to struggle.
Totally. And I think that an even bigger challenge or existential crisis lies for the retailers. So not CPG, but retailers themselves. Because if you're a retailer that sells fashion brands, unless you're fully controlling the narrative that Google Shopping sees or other agents see, you're just selling the brand just like another retailer is selling the same brand. So what differentiates you from another other than the price?
Yeah.
Because why would somebody looking for Dior, a specific sweater that they want, why would they go to you and not another retailer, unless you really capture that customer's interest from a loyalty standpoint, from a personalization standpoint? You want to make it more fun to speak to you than another retailer and distract them from the other retailer, essentially. So you have to move on that right now, or all of these products are just going to show up and people are going to pick the one that seems to be the cheapest. I think that's going to be the biggest problem. It's cheapest and the one they can get more quickly.
I'm obviously biased on this, but my hypothesis, particularly on the discovery side, if you're a retailer that stocks, or if you're a marketplace that stocks multiple brands, if you have far better data, like if you have tagged up your products with fit, occasion, styles, aesthetic, trends, you're more likely to be discovered, right? Because otherwise, if someone says, look, I'm going to this wedding in Milan, I don't know what to wear, I want to be fancy, my wife is going to wear this, what shall I wear? And if they have more of that data to give you better recommendation, that's always going to be the winner.
And I completely agree. I'm actually checking right now as we speak, if you go to Google Shopping, and I don't know if you want to pull that up right now, and ask a question, like give me dresses for a party or for a wedding, you'll see that Google is actually starting to have a pretty brand-like experience on the Google Shopping page, where you have refined by like things like, I think they have length, size type, sleeve type, color, department, material, pattern, price, size, silhouette, stores, brands. So we're getting into attributes that typically you're able to refine by in, actually not even Amazon. Amazon doesn't even have this level of detail in their left nav. Typically they have size and there we go. So if you go to the left down, brand is right there. So somebody's just searching for a nice dress. All of the brands are mixed up, right? And you have to know what you're looking for exactly. But it's doing a very good job at almost acting like a retailer for you to categorize the information in a way that that is easily browsable, but it's answering a query, like a conversational query of the customer at the same time. You can't really build a better agent for a multi-brand experience than what Google's already built. Like that part, I think we know they've put a lot of effort into it. They know what they're doing. But if you search for a specific brand though, and know that you're looking for Zara's or whatever, you will see that it does also try to do a good job to weed everybody else out from that. And now you are looking at the experience just for that brand. And that brand experience is what I'm saying we need to be able to at least control. So if somebody does like your brand, then we want to make sure that the experience that they see is catered towards your brand and it actually meets your brand guidelines. That's all they can control, to tell you the truth. Right now, I don't think there's much more brands can do other than just once we know that the customer wants your brand, make sure that brand is represented the right way on third-party agents. And then when it comes to the question of on-site, like on your agents within your own website or your mobile app, that's where you have a lot more control. But then there's the irony of it that customers may not go there at all. They may just start and end their conversations. If they are going to have a conversation, they may as well just have it with Google or third-party agents. Well, I think it's going to play out. Yeah.
I think there's something about the inspiration part. I think Google, it's already quite a high intent. You already have a wedding, and it does a pretty good job giving me dresses, but it doesn't really give me a really good inspiration journey. So if I wanted to continue and say, okay, now I want to find a matching handbag and shoes and what is my husband going to wear? Suddenly it doesn't really, that experience is broken, right? I think this is where probably places like Pinterest still has an advantage for the inspirational. And I'm very curious to see how that's going to play out. There's been some rumors about Pinterest and OpenAI, but maybe that's just the wishful thinking. But I think that would be very interesting to see. How do you take the experience that people get on Pinterest in this agentic product discovery? I think that's the marriage that we have to see.
That we need to see. Yeah, and I don't know if that buyout will actually happen or Google will buy them too, because they definitely have a lot more money than OpenAI does right now. And then they'll become really hard to beat at that point, because now you're talking about mixing inspiration with shopping, like that entire product knowledge graph that they have. And if they connect those two things together, it's going to start to open up experiences for the customers where they can say, hey, here's an image of a dress. Can you show me something like this dress that I want to wear in the summer, and make sure that the material is X, Y, and Z, and the size is blah, blah, blah. And so now you have all this data about the products, and you have the inspiration side by side, and you click on the inspiration image, and then products start showing up that look like that from places near you. I can see that happening. That's not that far away. That's not that far away.
It seems like a natural progression. We're almost at the end of the hour.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we both agree that this is pretty existential for some of the retailers. And right now, everyone's still thinking about how will AI help them with efficiency. But there's something really fundamental brewing. And we've never been in a time like this where it's not hypothetical. Like, this is happening now, and people are so not aware of it. So what is your recommendation? Like, what should brands do to protect their brand DNA?
That's such a loaded question.
It is.
Especially because things are changing so quickly, and I don't know what announcement AI or Google are going to make tomorrow. But one thing that is becoming clear is that Google is pro-merchant and OpenAI is not pro-merchant. We can see that. And I think it's because Google is smart. They know that they need big merchants like Walmart and Target and Etsy and a bunch of like Shopify to play nice with them. Otherwise, they're not going to get them to put their products on Google. So what I would do is follow what Google is doing at this point. That's where my bets would be. If they're asking merchants to provide their capabilities and their data in such a way that is going to be closer to their brand guide, follow that advice and do it quickly, because Google also, the algorithms are all based on how long the authority of a brand has been built for. If you just put something in, it's not going to get as much relevance as if you did it 2 years ago and it's gotten engagement since because of that. And it's important for brands to start to structure their data, structure their transactional and commerce experience capabilities, make it available to Google, start to really, I think, focus on that. And then at the same time, I think it's still important to build your own shopping agents, because Google's also actually starting to expose A2A, so agent to agent communication. So if you have your own agents, it potentially could eventually allow you to pass the customer to your own agent for specific queries, right? Because brands are going to want people to be passed on to them eventually so that they can sell to them directly. So have that going in parallel, but all of that still requires the foundation. The foundation is your data and how you build your product catalog and the metadata and all the information you can provide about your products that is done in a brand specific way. And then second is exposing your APIs, the endpoints and the capabilities for Google and other agents to get at it, because a lot of the brands right now, they've built their entire e-commerce operations in a very channel-centric way, right? So you have built your website with logic on what you're going to show to the customer built into the front end. Google doesn't know that logic, doesn't know why you're doing what you're doing. So it needs to be all declarative. It needs to be very explicitly defined, which means data structures, which means APIs. And you're right, like you said earlier, a lot of brands don't even know where to begin that. They don't have a role for optimizing the experience for agents, for instance, or a project that is like dedicated to making them show up the way they want to show up within third-party agents. So need to start looking at that for sure. There's really no other choice. And it's not optimal. I don't think any of this is for the brand, but they have to do it.
They have to go. And I guess from your side, this is exactly what you guys can help with, right? Is the API connectivity for the agents and for Google to consume them.
Exactly. Exposing those endpoints and the data to third-party agents as well as your own agents, and building a truly omni-channel presence. So the same APIs, the same data that you are building can be exposed to whatever channel you want to sell on, because these channels will explode, right? You're going to have Apple come in soon, by the way, as well. They're just been quiet right now, and their Siri is likely going to start to allow you to do shopping through the phone, like a voice interface with potentially an augmented screen in front of you that will say, okay, do you want to buy it now? And then you'll say, yes, Apple Pay, I can go buy it right this second. That's also coming likely. But it's all, I think it will all play out, and the dust is starting to settle already. You can see where it's going now. Now it's just how big is it going to get? So yeah.
Yeah. And from our side, it's we spend good probably last 10 years building this fashion taxonomy. So we have the in-house stylists who decoded all the different garments and fashion products into styles, aesthetics, trends, occasion. And we built it specifically for AI and for recommendation engines to be able to decide how to recommend an item. We have that information. So I feel like
that's very important.
What we have is the taxonomy and the language that the customers speak in fashion, and what you guys have to offer. I think it's a very compelling proposition.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're doing some work already, right? So we'll continue to work on those and publish something that shows that marriage well.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. That was, I knew this is going to be great. We didn't rehearse this or plan this, and this went exactly how I was hoping it's going to go. I definitely want to continue this
Amazing.
conversation. So, yeah, have a great weekend and enjoy lunch with your
Thank you so
husband.
much.
Speak soon.
All
All right.
right. Take care. Thanks, Ricardo.
All right.
Bye.